Welcome to the Employment Ontario Programs and Services for Employers. I'd like to personally thank South Niagara Chamber of Commerce for giving Employment Ontario and us providers an opportunity to share with each of you what we do in the world of Employment Ontario. While most think that the focus for employment services is on job seekers, the truth is that without employers, of course, we wouldn't be able to employ our job seekers. So this information that we're about to share with you today is also about employers in Niagara accessing Employment Ontario services. I would like to start by saying I apologize if I'm talking a little fast, but to be honest, I could speak in front of a room of 300 people, no problem, and the fact that I'm speaking in front of a camera is actually a little freaky to me. So I apologize. It is my first rodeo with the webinar. So with that being said, and my pace slows down as the nerves work its way through, part of today is to not only talk about what we do, but to collectively talk about what we do as 8 organizations. So I am Deanne D'Elia. I'm the Director of Employment and Immigrant Services with the YMCA of Niagara. We deliver Employment Ontario in 3 offices throughout Niagara, but our co-agencies, there are a total of 8 of us, relatively do exactly the same thing that I'm going to share with you today. So as I work through the process, I may share some YMCA of Niagara information, but everything that I'm sharing could be accessed at any Employment Ontario agency in Niagara and or throughout the province if you have locations and other offices throughout Ontario. So in Niagara, the 8 organizations specifically that deliver the programs and services that I'm going to talk about. In West Niagara, Employment Help Centre has a series of offices to support employers. There in Niagara Falls is Employment Help Centre and the YMCA. Fort Erie is Job Gym. And in Welland, we have Job Gym and Employment Solutions, as well as SURF. SURF is our Francophone provider. They actually provide Francophone services throughout Niagara in its entirety. So if you are a business whose main focus, language and delivery is Francophone, we do encourage you to certainly access SURF. In Port Colborne, we have Port Cares. In St. Catharines, we have Niagara College and the YMCA. We also have our 3rd office, YMCA office, recently opened in Thorold. So over the course of the last 8 years, as Employment Ontario has now become fully immersed in its mandate, certainly we've had some growth pains over the course of the last 8 years. However, since then, we have been supporting employers to the tune of thousands of employers throughout Niagara, upskill, hire, train, expand their workforce in one capacity or another. So at a glance, I guess the first place to start was the birth of Employment Ontario, so to speak. And it really was, the nuance behind development of Employment Ontario was to make Ontario as competitive as possible. So it was about developing a highly educated workforce. And through the agencies who deliver Employment Ontario, while we are all mandated to certainly deliver core functions, it's like any business. We all deliver it with a slight different flavor. And for that reason, we do encourage you to access those service providers in your area and visit and talk to them about what they could be doing for you. So 4 of the key areas that we'll touch on today are the financial incentives, the job matching, workplace training, and job fairs. So alongside those, you'll hear me talk about some programs, and I apologize if I throw an acronym out at you, but it's a world we live in, and sometimes we say them without realizing that those who are listening aren't familiar with those acronyms, so I do apologize. However, throughout the webinar, if there is an acronym that you're not familiar with, if you just type it in the little question box, I'll have that acronym thrown up at me, and then I'll be able to walk through that with you. So one of the quotes that we wanted to open up with, because we're coming at this from both the feel-good perspective, which is important for employers in Niagara, but really we're coming at this from an a business perspective. It is important that we impart to you the amount of dollars that are available for businesses in Niagara and throughout the province to grow their business. That's the intent of these funds, is to make us as a business more competitive in the larger labor market. So one of our employers has recently added this to the Employment Ontario statements, and it says, as you can see, the employment service provider helps us eliminate some of the costs training our new staff. Their clientele is hand-picked by the staff to suit our job requirements. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we move forward and talk about placements and some job fairs. But we thought that quote really summed it up best, because it really is about listening to you as the employer, sizing up what your business needs based on the description and the narrative that we have with you, and then working through that process to ensure that we are meeting your needs as an individual business. We do our best to avoid the collective. We do our best to avoid, for lack of a better term, feeding a system. The system actually doesn't need to be fed. The system needs to be driven and collaborated alongside employers and service providers. And for that, we do rely on employers to help us support in our delivery. So moving along, we'll focus on, so as you can see, some of the financial incentives that come up, they may be familiar to you if you've already accessed Employment Ontario services or like services in the past through the province or the feds. But these are a few that we'll highlight today. So we have apprenticeships, placements, Canada-Ontario Job Grant, and hiring a young person. So with just a quick glance at the apprenticeship, while relatively self-explanatory, it most certainly isn't. For any employer who has gone through the apprenticeship process, we do recognize that it can be a little convoluted and confusing. I do say that tongue-in-cheek, as the person who hands me the dollars funds that, so I have to be careful. But the reality is, it is a government system. It has a number of measures in place, and as a result of those measures, some employers can shy away from that process. Others have shied away from the process because they may have tried 3 or 4 different times with individuals and not found long-term success. This is part of what an Employment Ontario provider can assist you with. Again, I reflect back on the quote that talks about handpicking and finding the right match for you. This is really a lot about what that one-on-one support when an employment coach or a job developer or outreach coordinator, we all have different titles, but we do relatively the same thing. Come in and have a conversation with you and talk about what your hiring needs are. In the world of apprenticeship, not only does that include finding the job match, the client match, but it also talks about how do I work my way through all the paperwork that clearly can be quite onerous. We can help you walk through that process, take it step by step, and at the end of the day, we can help walk you and your new hire through the process of financial incentives, which are directed at both employer and the new hire. Once those financial incentives start to be put into place, it does increase, does not guarantee, but it certainly increases the likelihood of that client following through on long-term apprenticeship success. So that's part and parcel of the apprenticeship. The other piece, I'm going to jump a little bit over placements, and I'm going to move into the Canada-Ontario Job Grant. We're going to talk much more in depth about that in a few slides. So I'll just graze over the Canada-Ontario Job Grant. But at the end of the day, one of the most recent additions, not the newest addition, but one of the recent additions to Employment Ontario was, and this is a grant that is funded in partnership with the federal government, was the recognition that employers needed opportunities where there may not have been the financial ability to upskill their workforce. Again, it's about making the workforce in Ontario and thusly Canada, because Canada funds this in every province. It is about advancing our workforce so that they are competitive in the larger labor market, in the global market if necessary. So the Ontario, Canada Ontario Job Grant was born. And this program is an absolute amazing program in helping you increase your abilities business and your staff's ability to stay competitive. In fact, I'm pretty sure through CODGE, that's the acronym, a whole new word was invented in its upskilling. I type it in the computer and it brings it up as not a word, but it's a word because it's on every government website, so it's a word. So the whole upskilling notion, which again I'll talk further about in the CODGE slides, is really about having a business that knows it needs to ramp up its staffing knowledge or skill set and does not have the ability, financial means, to do so. Training staff can be a very costly endeavor. In Niagara especially, we find that because we are small to medium-sized enterprise for a bulk of our labor market, these businesses don't necessarily have the capacity to build upon experience and reach out to do training, which can be quite costly. So through the CODGE program, there are funds available up to $10,000 per employee to help drive that process. I'm going to flip to some slides in a minute that will talk a little bit more in depth about that, but I do anticipate that's where a lot of questions will come from, as that's where most businesses tend to lay their hat right now, is how do I increase my market share by increasing my staff's abilities. So, excuse me. Okay. So the other piece to talk a little bit about, I'm going to bounce back up to the placement piece. And just to throw out a statistic. Now, the statistic I'm about to throw out is a YMCA statistic, but we have a solid working relationship with the other EO providers in Niagara, and would wager a pretty strong bet that they are functioning and they are receiving targets and outcomes at the same level. So the placement component to Employment Ontario, it really is driven by employer-client who works alongside one of the Employment Ontario staff members, dependent upon organization. As I said earlier, they could be called a job coach, a job developer, an employer outreach coordinator, any one of those titles that you might be working with. And from there, we do our best to assess the individual based on their current skill level, based on the level of skills you require from an employee, and we do our best to put those two together. We have forms that we have to fill out. Forms is the nature of the beast when you are working with government funding, and we have a question regarding forms that I'll answer momentarily. But those forms really help us assess to ensure that the match that we are creating is successful for all. Let's face it, if I opened up my wallet and said, who wants $5,000, the hands would go in it. If I asked at the end of the day who spent the money in a way that was beneficial to them, that might be a little bit different. So what we try to do as a collective Employment Ontario delivery source is we work to ensure that the dollars that we are supporting individuals with have long-term benefits to not just the client, but to you as the employer. At the end of the day, the reality is I live in Niagara. I want to grow old here in Niagara. I want to see grandbabies here in Niagara. We all want the dollars to make a difference in Niagara. So it is our goal to always drive the purpose of the funding, but at the end of the day, recognizing the purpose of the funding is fundamentally to increase our labor market and make it more competitive. So we are always working with our businesses to ensure that match. One of the questions that came up was, how much time will it take me to fill out the necessary forms? Depending on the program, I would love to be able to lie and say 5 minutes, but that's not true. Depending on the program that you are going to engage in, the form process could be 20 minutes, it could be 40 minutes, it could be much longer depending on the level that you are accessing with CODGE and or the other programs. What I'd like to reassure you on is that for every form that must be filled out by the employer and the client and the employee, if that were the case, through CODGE, we have staff, as do the other Employment Ontario agencies, who will support you through that process in its entirety. I can speak on behalf of the Y, and I'm assuming the other CODGE providers are also doing the same thing. But our staff member, Alu, who some of you may be familiar with, will literally walk you step by step through that process. So if you were to go on and type in Employment Ontario, and then you scroll through to find the employer section, you will see, yes, there are lots of various forms that go with each component. But like I said, there is always a staff member to help support you through that process, always. So it doesn't seem as off-putting as you might think if you're just looking at it on your own. So the other piece, I'm just going to jump a little bit back to the placement piece. So there are parameters around who can do placement and whatnot, but again, those would all come to bear. We would answer all those questions once you reached out to us. But I would like to, again, just talk to as employer to employer. If I am hiring, one of the things that I know costs me a tremendous amount of time of my own, as well as my managers, but then also my team, as my team gets used to the new employee. When I think about all the time and the effort that takes, it can be quite costly. And the idea of a placement, and the reason we really target matching that client and that employer together closely, is because we know that, again, I talk about some money, but that money that goes out the door, it can easily go out the door, but does it have the impact that you intended it to have? I'm really proud to say, and again, I can only share the YMCA of Niagara's number, but over the course of the last 8 years, 90+% of those individuals that we did job matching and placement with were a hire at the end. That is a resounding success. Based on the excellent work I know that the other Employment Ontario agencies are doing throughout Niagara, I would have to wager that they're doing exactly the same. Their output is equivalent to what ours is. If you've not had a positive experience, you did hear me say only 90%, not 100, because there's going to be that fall through rate. And if that fall through rate happens, please don't say no to the next call or the next opportunity. Because I think that, hiring isn't a perfect science, but through the work of Employment Ontario and the staff who are there to support you, it certainly lessens the financial burden and eases the process and the likelihood of having to rehire. So there are certainly the bonuses to continuing to access. So if your first time out the gate wasn't successful, I do encourage you to go back, even if it's to the same gate. I think that's important because not all of us have a 100% success rate. We are boasting high success rates because we increase the probability of a good hire. And that's why, as a business, we think it's important that you continue to access those funds. That's what they're there for. So the last thing on this slide that I want to just quickly talk about is the hiring of a young person. So we all know that youth in our province, in our country, in Niagara, there is a clear struggle with many breaking into the labor market. And we do know that in Niagara, we do have a number of our youth who, for various reasons outside of their control, may be ineligible or not eligible to head off to post-secondary. Maybe they haven't completed their high school diploma. Maybe they're struggling with some life barriers, or maybe they have gone on to post-secondary, they've graduated, and now they don't have all the skills that are necessary to break into the labor market. One of the areas that we focus on in Employment Ontario is really looking at how do we build our youth employment base, not just in the province, but specifically here in Niagara, because these youth are our future. And either we're going to allow them just to muddle their way through, or we're going to take opportunities through this funding pot to actually increase the strength of our foundation of our labor market, which is our youth, plain and simple. So whether it is a post-secondary grad or a youth who just hasn't managed to find his way through high school, but we know with a little bit of support, with a little bit of world of work, that youth will advance themselves, and it may be a step-by-step process, but they will advance themselves. And through Employment Ontario, we have what's called the Youth Job Connection and Youth Job Connection summer program. There's Youth Employment Talent and Incentive, Young Talent Incentive. The acronyms go on and on. The truth is, there is I hate to say copious amounts because I'll get in trouble, but I just said it and we're live, so I guess I said it. But copious amounts of money to help support these youth and businesses who believe in their community and want these youth to grow into long-term skilled staff. There are funds and programs that will help you grow your own. I happen to be a very big supporter of Grow Your Own. And the reason I'm a big supporter of Grow Your Own is because fresh out of post-secondary, I had an individual take that opportunity and risk on me. And as such, certainly paved the way for the career that I have today. And I'm very grateful to that person. And it left me in Niagara, and it left me doing what I think are some pretty great things here in this community. And I have the pleasure of doing that alongside 60 amazing staff members. So as you look at your workforce, I'm doing a little bit of plug for the youth, but I really do encourage you to look at the individuals who have the potential to grow your company into the next level. And our youth are our foundation. If it weren't for the employers that have worked with us specifically at the Y, over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, I can assure you that there are about 300 or 400 youth who would not be where they are today. And for many of them, that's back in the classroom, graduating high school and moving from high school to post-secondary. So I ask that you do think about the hiring a young person when you think about Employment Ontario. Think about what that means to your business in the long term, but also think about what that means to the community in which you live. So it's a bit of a plug for the young guy, but I ask that you do consider that. Okay? All right. Okay, so I did just talk quite a bit about the job matching and workplace training that does come up. So aside from placement, and this leads us almost into the college discussion, but aside from placement, one of the things that we have done, or we can do as well, as long as we have certainly the employers who are willing to continue to participate, is we do look for things around the lines of mentoring, so allowing individuals to scope a career out, let's say, do some on-the-job shadowing, job matching in the sense where we may have a newcomer who isn't quite ready based on language level to enter the workforce. So we may do a job match or a job shadowing or a workplace experience for them to start to understand what that means in Niagara, in the context of working in Niagara. But the other thing that we also do when it comes to the job matching workplace training is we, through Employment Ontario, the providers will also do some on-site pre-training with your new hires. So this isn't COG. This is more along the lines of new legislation comes in, so new employment standards come in. One of the things that we are encouraged and mandated to do is to go and visit employers on their work site and help walk through some of that training. Of course, we are not specialists in those levels of training, but our goal always is to help employers be ahead of that curve and to ensure that they are always an employer who's able to receive our participants. And in order to be able to do that, we have to ensure that all legislation is being followed. So on occasion where an employer, new legislation may have come out and the employer hasn't quite gotten that legislation implemented, we do have the capacity to help support them so that that does happen. And again, we're talking in Niagara, we have a lot of businesses who are 2 and 3 and 4 staff. So a lot of that training time just isn't afforded as it might be in a larger business. They don't have the manpower to research and develop and implement. So again, I would ask that you look to your Employment Ontario provider to help coach and guide some of that process if necessary. The other thing that we have done through Employment Ontario is we have done some sensitivity training. So whether that is hiring individuals from diverse backgrounds, be it newcomers, hiring individuals who are ready to work and able to work, but may have a learning disability, and therefore may take a little more time in the training process. The other part of what Employment Ontario staff will do is they will walk you through how to best work with that individual. And at the end of the day, because we are so clear on how we select those individuals with that employer, even though the learning time may have been longer, the longevity in employment certainly outlasts, say, another individual. So again, it's all there. When you look throughout the employment and the hiring continuum, at each stage of that continuum, there is a role that we play in Employment Ontario should you wish to access that service. And you don't have to access them all. You literally can say, I just want to access CODGE and move on, or I'm interested in placement and then move on. But we think it is important for you to understand all aspects of this funding that is available to you. All right, so here's the meat of the conversation, which fair enough to be able to say, I may run Employment and Immigrant Services, but I certainly do not have all the information. My crew has the information. They're an amazing group, as are the other providers in Niagara. So I'm going to walk through these slides a little more than I would care to walk through something, but I want to make sure that I get the information correctly. At the end of this all, if you are interested in the Canada-Ontario Job Grant, I can field some questions, but the reality will be I will likely redirect you to the Employment Ontario providers and their CODGE coordinators or CODGE specialists so that they may answer those questions clearly. This is by far probably the most complicated program because it has so many measure markers that I really don't want to misspeak. So I'm going to be pretty careful on reading the slides, and so we're clear that we're prepared for me. I'm not going to lie. So as we look at the Employment Ontario Job Grant, the whole idea, and we talked about this in the beginning, was to allow businesses the opportunity who may or may not have the financial means, typically they do not have the financial means, to advance their workforce. In the time of its creation, what was happening across Canada and provinces collectively were increased layoffs. There was a slight downturn in the economy when that had originally happened, and Canada and the provinces, the federal government and the provincial governments got together to talk about how can we ensure that we stay competitive, because this is, in fact, layoffs were happening because that business was no longer viable. It was no longer competitive. So the Canada-Ontario Job Grant was born. So the purpose behind this grant program is for businesses to be able to assess what their needs are, decide what keeps my business moving forward. Do I have the skills to be able to do that? And if I don't, how do I get my staff those skills? The other thing that Canada-Ontario Job Grant really focused on at that time, and there's a little logo that gets attached to it every time, it's about job creation. And the purpose, when we think about, if I'm a business owner and I think about the continuum of my staff and the training, we typically will move a staff A to position B and B to C. But what happens if I don't have anybody who can go to C? A and B get stuck because they don't have that skill set. And maybe I try to hire for it, but I can't find what I'm hiring. So what CODGE and Employment Ontario are looking at doing, encouraging you to do, is to look at the A's and the B's, because you know they're the right fit for your organization. You know, as they say, they drank the Kool-Aid. And so they're the right fit, they have the culture down, but they just are lacking that skill set to move to the next level. So what CODGE will do is, when you consult with one of the Employment Ontario staff, is walk you through that process of how do you upskill B to get to C, A to get to B, and then thereby creating a vacant A, which means another person in our community now has that employment opportunity in front of them. It's in very simplistic terms what that looks like, and the complexity of CODGE isn't certainly that easy. However, it is important to really say, like, that's pretty much in a nutshell what we're looking at when it comes to CODGE. The other piece of the importance to know about CODGE, and again, 3 bullets do not talk about the 60 bullets that I'm sure could be going across the screens at this time, but it is up to $10,000 per employee. Sadly, an employee is not a business owner themselves. Training has to be delivered by an eligible third-party trainer. Okay, and the employers with 100 or more employees have to contribute. Okay, have to contribute to half the training costs. And then there's 1/6, and I'm reading this, and again, I'm reading. It's not my forte necessarily. It is certainly our CODGE coordinator has all that knowledge, as would the other CODGE staff member at the other employment Ontario agencies. But this is the bite that most people want to chomp on. So I really do encourage you to reach out to your Employment Ontario provider. And I had a question. I just have to, sorry, what was that question again? What is considered business? Business consulting services is pretty much what I've been talking about the whole time. So when you have a staff member, is that right? No? Yes? Sorry, I have somebody staring at me here. So the business consulting service is not allowed. I'm having a head shake. I apologize again. CODGE, not my forte. I have my coordinator here with me who's giving me some words to say. So at the end of it, the consulting piece is not permitted. Again, CODGE specific questions I'm going to ask that we hold off on. And we are going to, I'll give you the contact information at the end of who to reach out to. Okay? All right. Okay, sorry, getting to the next. Okay, so job fairs. The other piece to chit-chat about when it comes to Employment Ontario, you, I'm sure, have seen these come across business magazines, newspapers, websites. I know the chamber puts, various chambers put blasts out. Employment Ontario organizations can also support you in hosting job fairs. Whether it is on-site at your location or on-site at one of their locations. This process is all free. We will help you do outreach not just within Niagara, so we do share our information, but we will also then send a more larger broadcast email out when requested to other parts of the province and other parts of Canada. So we all have connections to other links which will deepen the pool of candidates that you might be able to select from. One of the things that's important to note is that all services that we will do for you are free in the job fair. That includes setup and tear down and all the, we can do pre-screening. So job fairs, much like the other pieces of information that we disseminate with you, alongside you, is also done on a one-to-one basis. So some employers ask us to do 3 or 4 pieces of the job fair. Others employers just want to use our space. They bring their staff and they implement the job fair. And we've had a few who as a collective have said that as an industry we're lacking in this, so they've come together as a collective to do some hiring. Again, if you're interested in the job fair piece, reach out to any Employment Ontario provider in Niagara, and they'll be happy to walk you through that process and support you in any way that they can. There were 2 quotes, and I apologize because I did skip them, but I think that they were rather important. I'm going to go back one. So this is the Canada-Ontario job grant quote at the bottom of the page here. And it says, as a small business owner, ongoing training of our staff is critical, but we don't always have sufficient funds to do it. The CODGE helped us achieve our goals for growth, local employer. And this particular employer is a very small employer who may seasonally have increases and fluxes in their staffing, but their core year-round funding group is, in order for that business to grow, these staff need to have further skills, they need to have further enhancement. And we all know that as a small business, culture is everything, fit is everything. And when you find the right fit, you want to be able to grow what you can grow. And that's what this small business did through Canada-Ontario Job Grant. The job fair quote, students, and this was from a student job fair, but we do, of course, adult job fairs as well. But students at the job fair were amazing and well prepared. by the staff, it was a great day, local employer. So again, as an employer, you can make the distinction between how much or how little we support you on that day. Our experience has been that the percentage of those get hired from a job fair really does not play, any weight does not play out as to how much we've helped or not helped. It really has to do with how much the client base has been introduced to that employer. So are we attracting the right people? And again, that's something that we can help you with when you're running your job fair, is are you attracting the right folks? I have another question that's being asked, and I believe it's through the CODGE grant. And it says, are conferences acceptable as training? And the answer is no. Training has to be provided by a third party, eligible third-party trainer. Okay, and again, I could look up 50 different websites and it would give you 50 different answers as to what that actually means. So again, I would encourage you to ask the CODGE provider at each of those locations throughout Niagara. And the last two to talk about today are team development and meeting space. So again, this is something that Employment Ontario offices and providers open themselves up to support you. Please feel free to reach out and access these services. And while they are listed as additional, it's important to note that they have tremendous impact. And for our small to medium-sized businesses, and even some of our large businesses who are now operating, they may have a number of staff, but their home base is one single office. So if you think about a business where everybody is working from their car and there's one office that orchestrates the daily activities and a call center to call into or whatever, when we think about those businesses, and we have quite a few of them here in Niagara, what is lacking when you are running that business is space to do staff training. And if you have tried to bring your collective 40 or 30 or 20 or 50 into a room, you're now having to look for space, and that usually becomes a fee for service. So with Employment Ontario programs, our offices are open to employers who are looking to do team meetings, training, if that were the case. So they hire a trainer. If it's not certainly an Employment Ontario provider, maybe it's a trainer that they'd like to have brought in for something specific. We have our meeting space that folks are more than happy, we're more than happy to have you come on in and use. Each location, again, size is variable from one Employment Ontario to location to the next, but I'm sure if you were to reach out to the various ones, you would find a location that would best meet your needs. The other piece to team development, I did allude to that a little bit earlier, and that is about preparing your staff or upskilling your staff or your new hires. For example, most Employment Ontario providers do run AODA training, WMIS training, Smart Serve, safe food handling. There are a number of trainings that you may wish or want another provider to come in and lead your staff team through, so that it frees up more of your time as a small business, frees up more of your time to focus on the other parts of the business. So by all means, again, reach out to any Employment Ontario provider to talk about what your business needs are when it comes to staffing. I think that about really sums up my part of certainly the presentation today. Thank you for your patience as my first attempt. I know I probably talked very, very quickly, and I do apologize. However, if you just slow the audio down, it'll come out sounding very normal. I promise you in replay. But aside from that, if we don't have, I don't believe we have any questions at this time. Oh, I have one here. I've used these services before, and they cost me money. How is this different? I don't know. No, I'm going to, some of the services that we're about to provide you, like CODGE, there will be a cost to. They're not in all cases, but there is a cost to CODGE, depending on your size and the scope of the training and some other components. The other pieces, I would really have to sit and have a conversation with you. I'd encourage you to reach out to me to talk about what those costs might have looked like. But the placement costs or the job matching costs, job shadowing, there should be no costs attached to an employer. Those costs should be covered through our emplacement incentives. The only cost that an employer would bear would be the exact same cost that you would have if you were to hire any other employee, save and except the wages. And even in the terms of the financial incentives that we provide you, it's not necessarily wage specific. So there are many contexts that go into putting a placement together. So if it's cost you, I think I guess what I'm trying to sum up is, if it has cost you in the past, please feel free to reach out to myself or to another Employment Ontario provider to talk about those costs incurred and what further costs there would be if there were costs, in fact, down the road. Okay? All good? Well, thank you very much for your time. I look forward to having a whole bunch of phone calls when I get back into the office. Thank you very much.